it's really important that we leverage this moment to kind of change things, to use this as an opportunity to do something different.
Agreed.
Yeah. So one of the ways that I think that is happening is through the elevation of this grassroots movement called Me Too. So by now we all know, and if you don't, let me be clear. By now, this movement was originally started by Tarana Burke via her non-for-profit organization, which is Just Be Inc. And she originally started this conversation in saying Me Too in response to girls and women who shared stories about their surviving sexual abuse or sexual harassment, sexual assault, as a way to connect to the humanity of the experience, as a way to be reflective and say surviving is a choice and it is an active stance to be in, but to let people know that they're not alone in that process. And so what happened is after the Weinstein incident came out, a well-known actress who has a lot of presence in the Twitter sphere, Alyssa Milano, tweeted out #MeToo. So she hashtagged it and asked people that if you have survived sexual abuse, sexual assault, sexual harassment, to make sure that you retweet it and share it. And at that point, the hashtag kind of became viral, and then more and more people started coming out, and more allegations started coming out. The other thing that I really think is important about what shifted the conversation is with the notoriety of the people that have been called out, the shaming has been public. And so it has left their employers and therefore corporations and institutions that were backing them with not very much recourse, but to fire them. And so there has been almost immediate, but actually direct consequence for those people. And I think that is a huge power in how social media really can engage us in social movement and social change.
I agree with that, but later on I want to come back to that because I have just a few stories to share in reference to an actor in particular who has been accused of something that he vehemently denies, and how his followers and haters are fighting on his social media. And it just leads to a larger conversation about false accusations, misinterpretations, and the entire concept of guilty until proven is innocent. So I just want to revisit that a little bit later, just putting that in your ear.
Sure. So to that point, let's get deep. So I think it's important. I really want to contextualize this whole movement and this whole time that we're experiencing. Because so one of the things that happened in response was that there then started to be this conversation coming from some men that were saying, well, if I smile at somebody, is that going to be considered sexual harassment? Or what can I say? Or I don't know what to do. It feels uncomfortable just to be in public spaces or to be at work anymore. I don't know how to act anymore. That's my sarcastic tone, right? Did you hear how I changed? It was like,
I peeped, as the kids would say. I peeped.
Gives you a little sense of my opinion about that perspective. The reason why I think that that's an important part to bring in the conversation is because I think that all of this, the issues and challenges around sexual harassment in the workplace, around sexual harassment in public spaces, sexual assault, centers around us at the heart being a country that's embedded in sexism. And I define sexism drawing from some social justice educators and advocates as a system of advantage that serves to privilege men or masculinity, and that subordinates women, denigrates women-identified values and practices, and that enforces male dominance and control. And I think that when you take a step back and look at this whole situation under that broader scope, it allows you to be able to better understand the many facets of the conversation. Because there have been folks that have come out, both men and women, people of all genders, to say, how do we know all of these allegations are true? Right? Or to kind of make a counterpoint of saying that sometimes women, quote unquote, cry rape, and that we can't always take someone's word for it. On the other end, I genuinely believe that some men did experience a lot of self-reflection and anxiety around how they conduct themselves, how they interact with other women, what's allowable and what's not. And I think that came out of a genuine place of ignorance. And for me, this idea around sexism being a systemic kind of context in which we live in, a systemic context that privileges and values men and masculinity over women and femininity or women identified values and practices, as a way of helping us be able to understand how both of those things could be true. If you take this overlay of sexism, and we think about sexism happening not just on the individual level, right? So not just like in between two people, where people socializing their boys to not cry, as one example, or people socializing their girl children to be quiet or be diminutive, right? So we could think about that maybe as an individual example of sexism. What we're seeing now in this shift is how sexism gets embedded in our institutions, through our laws, through our policies and practices, and also at our bigger kind of cultural, societal levels. So when men say, how do I know I'm not being sexually harassing? They don't know, because part of how men are socialized to engage with women, how men are socialized to think about their own masculinity, how men are socialized to think about and engage femininity and women identified and connected things, is one that serves sexism. And so it is unclear. I think what we're seeing with a lot of these men that have been accused and who've been fired or been removed from their positions of power is that there's been power, real tangible power attached to those positions that they've held, and they've lost those. But we also have to remember that this happens whether the person is, your supervisor at work or your superior at work, or whether they're quote unquote your peer. That it isn't about necessarily occupational position, but how power manifests and how people use power. Does that make sense to you, Tomas?
Oh, it absolutely does. And I guess the thing I'm thinking about as you're saying all of this, I find it hard to believe. I'll change that. I was going to say I find it hard to believe that anyone can look at the world the way it is structured, the way it has always been structured, and say to themselves, I don't believe I'm a part of this system, and not understand it for what it is. But then I remembered, as a gay black man in America, there are people who will look at me and say, what racism? What heterosexism? You don't act gay, so I just assumed you were straight. Or you don't sound black. So it's difficult for me, just drawing from those correlations that I've experienced, it's difficult for me to accept I didn't know as an excuse when you live in a country where you learned American history and you clearly know that there was a time when women were not allowed to vote, where a husband could legally beat his wife, where a woman had no legal right to deny having sex with said husband. Like,
yeah,
all of those things.
So, and I think, and I think absolutely, and I think so. One, I don't assume that everybody always knows that history. I really don't. But two, I think even if you do know that history or you point to that history, those examples are fairly stark and pretty easy to see. I think what is different about sexual harassment and around sexual assault is that it becomes way more nuanced. And another part, a layer that I want to add to this piece beyond sexism, I think is part of us having a sex negative culture. We're not a culture that openly talks about sex and sexuality. It's kind of hidden. It's kind of always in the dark and behind closed doors. And so I think if you combine both of those pieces together, we don't have real clear understanding and guidelines around what is harassment, what is consent, how do we understand mating and dating outside of a context that is rooted in sexism, that is rooted in heterosexism. So when people say, I don't know, can I smile at you? Is that too much? I think they genuinely are confused because everything that they have known up until that point has told them that that's okay. And they have a right to do that because of their masculinity.
And I think I got to interject there because I think you just hit the nail on the head for me. As I'm listening to you and I'm hearing this, and I understand the complexities. I'm not just trying to dismiss them, but I am saying to myself, in all of this, harassment, rape, whatever it happens to be, the only thing that's being asked is that you redefine your masculinity outside of the context of oppressing women. Mm-hmm. And if you do that, then you won't have to worry about anything. If you truly treat women as equals, then, and not just treat women as equals, truly believe that women are equals, which is the paradigm shift that you always hear me talking about. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. If you truly do that, then you don't need to worry about if you smile at someone because they'll know where your intentions are. It'll become a part of the culture. And when you genuinely smile at someone, it will be just that, a smile. But when you create a culture in which you oppress other people, in which you get away with rape, I'm still that whole 20 minutes of a mistake, foolishness that this guy, I can't even.
Brock
I can't
Turner.
even.
Right.
Right.
Brock Turner.
Right.
How dare he have to suffer?
Right.
Years
For
in
20
prison
minutes.
For 20 minutes of one mistake that he made, right?
Right. So when you realize that is more of the prevalent attitude and that you must do the work as a man to move against that instead of assuming that you know what a woman wants, that you ask the question. And it's a simple question. Ask yourself, the things that you are doing to this woman, do you want done to your mother, to your sister, to your daughter? If you saw another man saying to your daughter, hey, baby, nice ass, or whatever, how would you feel about that as a man? And see, men always make that disconnect. They want to treat women a certain kind of way, but be the first one to go grab a shotgun when you talk crazy to their own daughters, to their own mothers, or to their wives. So,
but and that's where I think things are particularly.
You're being more empathetic than I am.
and for me, it's not even about empathy, right? Because so it's not about empathy for me at all. It's about really having a clearer understanding of the context so that I can better understand how I might address the real issue. Because for me, again, let's remember I'm a psychologist, right? And so I appreciate all of the conversation about what is harassment and how can people feel empowered and how people can have access to legal recourse around that. But for me, it's a bigger picture because I'm thinking about the psychological consequences and how we all contribute to I include myself in that. We all contribute to kind of reinforcing the sexist status quo. And I think it requires a lot more conscious thought and diligence on our part than what you simply